Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another episode of the Classics Show. I am your host Shabnum, Riaz. As always, it's a pleasure to be here to be able to talk about the classics. And today, actually, we are going to talk about a real classic in every sense of the word. And what we're going to talk about today is IBN-e Khaldoon and his work, which he's best known for, the Muqaddimah. And this is a classic. It was written 600 years ago. And it started in the year 1377, and it is known as one of the best philosophies of history, the science of history, the study of history. So to talk about, this very, very big subject and such an immense writer and the Muqaddimah itself, we have with us an expert in the studio. I'm very happy to introduce Dr. Mahmood Hassan. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us here today. You are a consultant at the moment with the HEC, but also the former Vice Chancellor of Allama Iqbal Open University, among many other things. So thank you very much for being here today.
Good to be here.
Right. Dr. Hassan, if you could tell us what, we talk about classics. What really is the definition of a classic? How do we term something that, this is a classic?
Certainly, very good question to start. A classic has been defined after a lot of debate in many different ways. Mm-hmm. Number one, a classic should have some great ideas about truth, about beauty, as about justice also. Mm-hmm. Classics typically are those literary works which have withstood the test of time. As you pointed out in your introductory remarks, Muqaddimah by IBN-e Khaldoon was written in 1377, and therefore 640 years have gone by and people have looked at it, they've analyzed it, and today IBN-e Khaldoon is recognized as the father of modern sociology, philosophy of history, social structure system, demography, and political economy.
Right.
So that's the testing by the time.
Right.
So over a long period of time, scholars have read it, analyzed it, and then recognized its worth and value.
And to be relevant in today's world.
This is the third part. A classic should have connections with contemporary times. So typically, when somebody wrote on Shakespeare's tragedies, for example, Lear or Othello, they looked at those characters and they felt, how are they relevant to an ordinary human being? What is the problem with Iago? What is the melody? Why is he after poor little Desdemona and Othello? Now, so relevance to the contemporary period, everybody finds something as if it's about me.
Exactly.
So that's the classic.
The connection.
Connection.
Right.
All right. So this is what we find in Khaldoon's Muqaddimah.
Right.
Muqaddimah is the introduction to what he started to write as the philosophy of history. How does one write history? And what are the key elements that history should reflect and also should avoid? Because there's a tendency in general, historians often are playing to an audience.
Right.
Who hired them?
Exactly.
Who is the person who's
to make
paying
them
for
famous.
them? To make them famous.
Praise them.
Or to praise them.
Biased.
Bias,
Right.
all right. So
Yeah.
basically, the first thing that he writes in the Muqaddimah is that what should a historian avoid? Number one, he says, be as objective as possible.
Right.
Don't just try to please your patron. Pleasing the patron will come through the documentation.
And actually that's a very bold thing to do at that time, to,
That's right.
to say all that and to state it.
Exactly. And not only, as you said, it's a bold thing, but it's something that had not been done at that time. 1377 is a very critical period in history, history of Islamic societies as well as history of the world. Europe is going through its dark ages, and here we are in Cordoba, in Fez, as well as in Cairo, as well as in Baghdad. Here we are trying to rediscover the wisdom of Greeks, the Romans, and then out of that, what Ibn Khaldoon is saying, let's be scientific. Now, it's very interesting, 1377 to write scientific history.
Exactly.
What did he mean by that? So basically, when we read Muqaddimah, all 3 volumes of it, what he's suggesting is that let's be objective, let the facts stand, and let's see how those facts have impacted society.
How was he received at that time, his thoughts?
Very, very interesting question. He was received, number one, because of his belonging. He came from a very prominent family in Fez, Tunisia. Parents were both functionaries at a very high level, magistrates or qazis or advisors to the rulers at that time.
Right.
So he got the best education.
Okay.
He was a hafiz of Quran. He studied fiqh. He studied the traditional history of Islamic evolution.
Right.
But then he found that we have not done justice to it. Therefore, he embarked as a 20-year-old person to take a look at what were some of the errors that we have made in writing our history. But as he looked at that, he felt we had some tremendous scholars. Avicenna, Abu Ali Sina, Ibn Rushd, or Averroes. These are the people, just to name a couple, but there are people who are in chemistry, there were people who in mathematics, but these were the people who were contributing something original, which was not available at that time. And that's what he embarked upon doing. Now, from 20 years on to about 36 years age, 1334 he's born, 1406 he passes away. But the first 30 years of his life, he developed himself not only as a Muslim scholar, but also he broadened the horizons.
He made himself appealing to the world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the idea came to him that we need to write not just the Tunisian history or history of the Maghrib as it's called, but also Islamic history, but then put it in the larger context, world history.
Right.
So the project, which was a lifelong project for him, was to do what came to be known as Kitab al-Abar. That's the philosophy of history book, which is a major book that he wanted to write. Muqaddimah literally means introduction. So these 3 volumes are the introduction to the history. But the importance of this is that he covered so many topics in that. For example, he says, how do a community evolve from the old traditional pattern to a little more sophisticated pattern? So he developed the stratification of societies. The Bedouins.
And this was all based on his
observation, and that's the scientific method. Observe, describe, and then verify.
And be objective.
And be objective.
Unbiased.
Exactly.
Because he kept emphasizing on the fact that you have to be objective when getting scientific data for historical studies. You must not be influenced by any other.
Certainly. And what the kinds of things that he said we need to avoid are, don't be partisan. Don't be subjective.
Right.
Don't just follow facts in the light of what somebody wants you to
Blindly.
follow. Yeah,
Right.
no blind following.
Yeah.
So that's why when he studies the first part in evolution, how does society evolve? And he spent a lot of time in describing in book 3, 4, and 5 how a society goes from the rural subsidiary society, subsistence society, and then gradually under leadership of a ruler or leadership of an elite class, gets sophisticated enough, adds value to it, and then start creating what he called, and that's one of the great ideas, collective communal targets or goals.
Right.
This is what he calls asabiya.
Asabiya.
Asabiya, this is a concept which wasn't there, but he, on the basis of his observation, he says every community in the beginning has some kind of collective
That glue
concept.
factor.
Exactly.
The glue factor, yeah.
Exactly. And that glue, as you have called it, gives them a sense of identity.
In fact, Dr. Sab, I think this is very interesting to note that if you think of two strangers meeting each other on a train or anywhere, and they start talking, and while they're having a conversation, they find out that they're from the same place.
Sure.
The amount of joy,
Immediate
connectivity,
connection.
and they will be ready to help each other
Sure.
out in
Yeah.
everything.
Sure.
That is
And
exactly
this
what he's
is
talking about.
the beginning
Right.
of asabiya.
Right.
He puts it in a sociological context and he says, asabiya not only is communal feeling, clannishness, but asabiya also relates to common goals
Right.
that society would like to achieve.
Right.
And normally common goals are those kinds of values, beliefs, customs, traditions, which will enable you to achieve higher common goals. Go from rural to an urban society.
Okay. So my question is that asabiya at that time, it was the reinforcement of clans, communities, whatever. But does it also lead to a sort of an isolation?
Sure. This is the second part of the concept of asabiya.
Right.
Initially, it's a very positive element. A society agrees upon certain common goals, a direction is established, and you start achieving those goals, which leads you to enrichment, luxury, new products, and new contribution to the society.
Okay.
All right? But then, after reaching a particular stage, he says societies then begin to divide themselves. Rather than the commonality, they begin to divide themselves, either because of competition from others or because of internal rifts.
Right.
The commonality is lost.
Right.
And when you lose the commonality, then there are different kind of factions in society.
So they'll be together until they're achieving their goal.
Until they have achieved.
And when they've actually achieved it, that is when they start to be a bit discontented.
That's right. And what's the basis of this discontent? He describes that. The basis of this fissiparous tendency, division, is the development of a few on top who has control or ownership of the instruments of wealth, economy, and those who are to work.
Right.
Now, so that divides the group into two.
I remember in a conversation we had earlier, it was really fascinating. You were explaining about the haves and the have-nots.
Exactly.
And then the development of the, because of that, the middle class.
Sure.
Tell us about that. I thought that was
right.
something that I've used.
So basically, he says, first about 40 years in the life of a society, we are pulling all in the same direction. We are adding new values, you're adding new wealth, we are creating new ideas. So we reach a place where society feels.
Is that the optimum level?
That's the optimum level at that time.
Right.
But then something happens. The haves who control, you can call it elite also, or the upper strata of society, they will control wealth, they will control quite a few of the things which today we call luxury items, and they will use the have-nots to do that. So they are the people who work, and the others are the people who enjoy. All right. But this enjoyment leads them into those kinds of declining elements where different interests, rather than given the same kind of direction, they go in different directions.
Right.
Now, at that level, what happens is society begins to disintegrate. This disintegration leads to the division within the society. Those who have it, they will enjoy it. And the enjoyment will be in many different ways.
And they're controlling everything.
And they control everything. But those who don't have it, they are saying, why?
We've been
Today,
working hard.
Yeah, we've been doing it.
And so why aren't we sort of reaping the benefits?
All right. So this creates the division in society, but this division results, he says, in the production of a very small middle class. There are some within the elite and some within the have-nots who will start talking about it.
Okay.
All right. Now, this discussion, this debate, this differences of opinion leads to creating what can be called as a small middle class.
Okay.
Okay, so 3 tiers.
Right.
All right. But the second phase in the rise of a civilization is a phase where instead of commonality of ideas, we have discord. And that's where what Khaldoon has called is a period of stagnation.
Okay.
This stagnation also
So you have the first 40 years of
first about
rise.
40 years of rise.
Then you reach the
then
optimum
40
level
years
of
of stagnation.
You're on the same,
And in that stagnation, 3 things happen. The middle class begins to emerge. He calls that marauders from outside begin to come in.
Okay.
And they say, come on, you are not doing it right way. We are going to do it right way.
Okay.
So they impose their ideas.
Right.
And then within the society, economic disparity creates the conditions for
Disharmony.
disharmony.
And that's the greatest cause.
That's the problem. Then he says, about 40 years for the rise, 40 years for stagnation, and it'll take another about 40 years
For the fall.
for the fall. So
What initiates the fall?
what initiates the fall? Decay of ideas.
Oh, okay.
Original common ideas which gave you a sense of community so
Right.
that you could communicate with each other and pull in the same direction, that's lost.
The asabiya is lost.
The asabiya
Right.
becomes the negative asabiya.
Okay.
Today we call it asbiyat,
Okay.
lack of appreciation. The Kashmiris
Envy.
will say, we got it all.
Yeah.
Our food is the best, our clothes are the best, our shawls are the best. And the Pathans will say the same thing.
Right.
And then the Balochis will say the same thing. And I'm taking contemporary
Yeah.
division,
Right.
asabiya.
Yeah.
And that's asabiya divides the society, which leads to decline.
So that's basically also, you know, a sort of a lack of tolerance and passing judgment on others, and it's
Sure.
sort of a superiority complex as well, isn't it?
We are the best. You have to come up to us. And this fundamental struggle leads on to discord in society and somebody else, another ruling elite, another group which comes in and says, we are better than you.
They're seizing the moment,
And
aren't
they're
they?
seizing
They're the
moment.
catalysts.
Exactly. And they are the catalysts for change.
Okay.
Now, 1377, to look at what's happening in Tunisia, what's happening in the old spring of Western culture in Mecca, Medina, Hijaz, Baghdad, he looks at it and says, what's going on? Why all this? And during that time, another very important thing happens to him. Tamerlane comes in. He's the outside marauder. He's the outside conqueror. He's the influence which is coming from outside. An interesting thing happens. He calls for Ibn Khaldoon, come, let's talk. Tell me about this history,
Right.
which has taken you from nothing to everything, and now you're
Full
fighting with
circle.
each other.
Back, yeah.
You're fighting with each other. You can't defend yourself. Why? Tell me. So Tamerlane offers him to be his advisor,
Right.
and he declines that diplomatically. He says, no, I'm a historian, I'm a scholar, I need to do my scholarly work, please.
He knows he has that intellectual wealth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he also knows that he's an outsider.
Right.
And he has his own agenda. He wants to use his intellect so that he could
Exactly.
be the
Of course.
dominating authority.
So everything, you know, what is fascinating about this conversation is that it's so true. When you hear quotes like, you know, watch your thoughts, they become your words. Watch your words, they become your actions. Watch your actions, because then they define you.
Sure.
So it all is starting with these mind games.
Exactly, exactly. All right. Now, rise, stagnation,
Fall.
decline. And then replacement by somebody else, another group. Now, in the process, he says there are a few things that are very important to know.
Okay, sorry to just interrupt you there. The replacement, is the replacement inevitable, or will there be a vacuum before there's another replacement?
Vacuum is emerging during the middle stagnation phase.
Okay.
But decline is inevitable when you have lost your commonality of purpose.
Right.
All right? When you are focusing on my privilege rather than your right, the result will be disintegration.
Right.
And some third force or an exterior element
Will take
come in,
advantage.
will take advantage of that. Give you a very interesting example. Alhambra is one of the man-made wonders of the world. I've visited it. I've been to Cordoba. I've visited that. And the interesting thing is, when the last caliph in Cordoba was defeated by the Christian king and his queen, he was leaving Alhambra, which is like a heaven on earth. That's the way he created it. He had tears rolling down his cheeks. And his mother turns around and says, why are you crying like a woman, what you couldn't defend like a man?
Oh.
This is a very famous quote. Here is something which tells us why decline. But then a British historian by the name of Arnold Toynbee picks up this idea of cyclical evolution and decline.
Okay.
Gibbon focused on the Roman Empire, and he writes a huge tome on the decline of Roman Empire.
Right.
But the cyclical idea, based on Asbiya, that Ibn Khaldoon had developed, has become the key element to tell societies how to avoid this decline. You can delay it, but if you don't mend yourself,
It's inevitable.
it's inevitable.
So what is the Achilles heel for many of these falls of these civilizations and empires? And would it be the sort of self-indulgent
This
streak?
is number one. Number two, and most important, is the divisions within themselves leading on to internal
Rifts.
discord and rifts.
Okay.
And that leads to undertaking military ventures which are non-productive and destructive in themselves.
So the provision of social justice is something that's very,
That's
very
one.
important.
But the kind of thing beyond that is that when a superpower, name whatever, whichever from history, and when you have a superpower which assumes the role of global policeman and starts to use its resources for playing that role, you get involved in wars that cannot be won.
It's also an element of overconfidence as well, isn't it?
Overconfidence, but misappropriation and utilization of your power and resources. Now, this is another basic reason why decline and fall of empires. Now, take a look at the British Empire. Churchill said, "Sun never sets on it." A postage stamp size country, an island, goes all the way from
Very
the
ambitious.
Near East to the Middle East to the Far East.
Right.
And it's interesting to see what is east of
Absolutely
we're
true.
from. So they are looking at it from England,
From their perspective.
from their perspective, Near East,
And named it so for the rest of the world to
for
follow.
the rest of the world to follow, if you are subdued by them.
Right.
If you decide to question it, then you have to describe it in more descriptive terms. West Asia, East
Right.
Asia, Southeast Asia, those are more descriptive terms.
Right.
But Near East, Middle East, Far East is from the British perspective.
Right.
And the sun did not set on that. Churchill was right. Till we come to this extended World War I and World War II conflict leading on to decline. So the British had no choice but to let the crown jewel in their empire, India, go its way, independence.
Right.
So this is one example.
Okay.
Today, and I mentioned to you, today the founder and owner of Facebook,
Oh yeah.
Mark
that is
Zuckerberg.
really, really interesting.
Mark Zuckerberg is observing. And today, with the millions of people who are using this social networking, expressing their ideas, and they are questioning. We have been in Afghanistan. We have been in Iraq. Over the the longest war in American history is not World War II, it's what's happening in Afghanistan. So he is concerned. And IBN-e-Khaldoon makes a lot of appeal to him.
Right.
So he says, let's read a great classic
Right.
every 2 weeks. And that was his resolution in 2015. And book 11 that he had was Muqaddimah.
Amazing.
He says, read it. Why? Because we were the sole surviving superpower
Right.
in 1945. We had Marshall Plan for Europe. And then we got entangled into all these military expeditions for which we're not getting anything. So the number one economy is now getting challenged from number two economy,
Exactly.
which was for a while Japan,
Yeah.
now
China.
China.
Yeah.
So decline, you ask the question, number one, loss of direction.
Right.
Number two, this exploitative system and this entanglement in those kinds of wars which are not going to give you anything but drain your resources.
Right.
And the final thing which kills a civilization is the inherent corruption of the elite.
Okay.
Now, what is this corruption? It's not monetary. Corruption is
Moral decline.
moral decline.
Okay.
You have the facts, you create alternate facts,
Which are self-serving.
which are self-serving.
Right.
Now, so when you start ignoring the facts and create your self-serving alternate facts,
Where others suffer.
you are on the decline.
Right.
And that's basically one reason today, 2017, we can at least speculate.
Absolutely.
The people like Mark Zuckerberg may get involved in the political system, not as a member of the economic elite, but as a member of the intellectual elite. We got to stop it.
Right. And then, and that what makes him so relevant, Mark Zuckerberg, is
Yes.
that his rise
Exactly.
to fame
Sure.
and founding Facebook and taking it forward and making it into such a amazingly flourishing social media network, is that tells us that that individual knows what he's thinking.
Exactly.
And he has farsight and insight too.
Yes.
So him saying something would be, you know, something that people should take notice of. We're going to go for a break right now, but we're going to come back and don't change the channel and stay tuned. Hello and welcome back to the program. We were having a fantastic conversation with Dr. Mahmood, we were talking today about Ibn Khaldoon and the Maha Dhamma. Fascinating insights onto history and why it's so important to read about history and to learn from it, because it's a continuing learning process. Before we went for the break, you were talking about Mark Zuckerberg and what he has to say about the Maha Dhamma. It's a book that everyone should read. Do you think that our youngsters in Pakistan have heard that message?
Well, if they haven't, they better. Now, since we talked about Mark Zuckerberg, 2015, his New Year's resolution was to read an important book every 2 weeks. And he put it on the Facebook. Here are the books that we would like to do. And then let's talk about them. Not just read, analyze, think about them, and then let's discuss them. Now, the first 11 books that he selected basically dealt with this cyclical notion of how and why do civilizations rise, decline, and fall. Because he's concerned about the sole superpower getting into those things which have created the decline and demise of civilizations. He selected book number 11, Muqaddimah by Ibn Khaldoon. Why? In his words, he explains that this is a history of the world written by an intellectual who lived in the 1300s. It focuses on how society and cultures flow, including the creation of cities, politics, commerce, and science. And says these are some of the achievements of our society when he's talking about American context. But he's also concerned about the reasons why civilizations fall. And he sees some of those things happening in the United States. That's why he selected this book. Read it and see what Ibn Khaldoon had predicted in 1377.
Because this concerns us now.
Exactly. And so he said, cyclical theory of history is a very profound idea. And let's not take it for granted that we'll always be the sole superpower. There'll be others emerging. And they'll be emerging and exploiting our weaknesses of our division. We had divided ourselves into red and blue states. We had divided ourselves into Republican and Democrats. And we don't agree with each other. We fight with each other. We have taken on responsibilities for which we don't have to. We don't have to go to Afghanistan and have a 15 years continuing war. He says, Ibn Khaldoon has told us such enterprises are destructive and non-productive. Okay. And then he has also shown us that the stratified society is not just the haves and the have-nots, but there's a strong middle class in them. And this is the class which creates new knowledge. This is the class which creates new tools. This is the class which creates new ideas. And this is what collectively we call free, universal, educational system with tremendous amount of quality, which produces your Nobel laureates. That's where we ought to be putting our resources rather than killing innocent people
Yeah.
in Iraq or Libya or Afghanistan or other parts
Right.
of the world on the basis that they are our enemies. He said, that's not the way it is.
Right.
So that's why he says, read. And create that kind of educational system out of which you'll develop that productive class which is not producing monuments for the elite, which is producing schools and colleges and institutions, which is creating a community of just social order. Ibn Khaldoon gave a very interesting definition of a surviving state. He says the surviving state is the one which is dedicated to and committing to itself to creating a social, welfare and justice oriented society.
Absolutely.
So long as you have that, you'll keep going.
Yeah.
But when you lose sight of these things,
Discontent.
it's discontent, it's corruption, it's class warfare,
Yeah.
it's stratified structure of society, and people say, grab whatever you can.
Exactly. It's
Morally
sort of
or
the survival
immorally,
of the fittest and every
survival of
man
the
for
fittest.
themselves.
That's right.
Exactly.
And this is what Khaldoon was saying. A state which does not do the kinds of things, it's the state which does not do away with the injustices in society will go to the dust heap of history.
So true.
And those injustices are exploitation, usurpation, taking everything for myself and not for the collective good. That's why I say a state which will survive, a civilization which will survive for a longer period of time than this 40, 120 year cycle. He says that's a civilization or state is which sort of embark upon creating this social welfare society.
And in fact, it's very interesting to note that this is also an example of how families disintegrate.
Exactly.
A family unit,
Yes.
even an extended
Sure.
family, as long as everyone is caring for each other
Yes.
and making sure that the weaker people in the family are being tended to, are being cared for, are being compensated,
Yes.
and a sort of a balance is being adjusted in
Yes.
some way or the
Sure.
other, you will find those families
Yes.
sticking together for generations
Certainly.
and being able to have this amazing symbiotic relationship.
Yes. Each successive generation, if it is to be better than the previous, by contributing knowledge that we did not have, by sticking to the values of righteous activities, they will survive,
They will survive.
and succeed.
Amazing.
Now, this is the reason why we are having this program today.
Right.
And I think the lesson out of this is that let's pay attention to what the great classical thinkers of our society have
There's a
produced.
reason that they're
Exactly.
being put in that category.
Sure, right.
Yeah.
Now, that takes me to Khaldoon 3077. But after that, and just before that, we had the golden period of Islamic Muslim culture.
Absolutely.
We produced the
Enrichment.
first dissection-based anatomy text, which was textbook for 600 years in Europe before Gray's Anatomy took over.
What would Ibn Khaldoon be saying today?
This is exactly what he
And
said.
And if he was alive,
Sure.
if he was, in today's society and he saw the decline of the intellectual output coming from the Muslim world,
Yes.
what would he say and how would he deal with Islamophobia?
Yeah. Well, this is exactly what he said. Islamophobia is not there. It's within us. That's where dissipation and division begins to emerge. Sectarianism. So he, in his autobiography, takes one of the short surahs from the Quran, since he was a Quranic scholar also. He says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala invokes wal asr, the time that has been, that is, and that will be, all times, And on the invocation of that says, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. But before that, it says, وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ. Mankind in general are the losers. Except إِلَّا الَّذِينَ, except those who cultivate these four qualities in them. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. Those who have faith in themselves and what they do. Believe in what they do and believe and do what they believe in. First.
Right.
Second, amalus salihat. Those who do righteous deeds, which avoid corruption, which avoid exploitation, which creates a welfare society.
Exactly. Empathy.
Common weal, which leads to common wealth.
Yeah.
All right?
Okay.
And then he says the third key element of those who are not the losers, وَتَوَاسَوْا بِالْحَقِّ. Watawaso, come close to, seek proximity to all kinds of truths,
Right.
search truths.
Right.
And these are the producers of new knowledge, new skills, new competencies, which will create new horizons. And the fourth attribute, he says, what I have seen in our golden age, people were not only believers in what they did, righteous actions, also searching for truth all the time, scientific truths. But the fourth element was وَتَوَاسَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ.
Oh.
Those who persevered
Right.
to do all these things.
Which is in itself a jihad.
This is basically, he says, that's what a scholar is supposed to be doing.
That is why the ink of a scholar is more holy than the blood of a martyr.
Absolutely. And so those are the famous sayings. We know them. But do we act upon them?
Yeah.
So that's why
So true.
my request to the next younger generation, devote yourselves to reading. Read the best that's available. And it's available here in our culture.
Yeah.
It's available in other cultures. Those who are rising, let's see why. And those who are declining, let's see why.
Pay
And
attention.
adopt
Yeah.
what is the attribute of the successful and avoid what are the hardships and wrong actions of the declining ones. This is the lesson of IBN-e-Khaldoon.
So true. And you know, it's amazing to sort of also realize the huge responsibility that we carry. And are we really dealing with ourselves? I mean, there's so much going on, so many distractions. We're involved in so many other things other than self-reflection. So that part of our lives is very, very important. And what better than a book for self-reflection, and then a book like Maha Dhamma.
Which has withstood the test of time.
Exactly.
And Maha Dhamma is something that I recommend people to read. 3 volumes, it's a huge text, but each page opens up new avenues. Science of economy. He doesn't call it dismal science. He says economy is based on the materials that we have produced, and whatever is surplus is a profit, and that's what we can reinvest either in building monuments or in creating new talent.
And knowledge.
And knowledge. And talent is what's produced new knowledge.
Right.
And that's basically, he looked at what's happening in his lifetime. And in 1406, when he passes away, he was spending his time in Cairo as a teacher. He has been a diplomat, he has been a scholar, he has been a writer. He is one of the greatest minds according to not just our scholars, but the Western scholars.
Yes, exactly, worldwide.
But he spends the last 6 years of his life after his diplomatic encounter with Tamerlane in just lecturing writing, and finishing his work, Kitab al-Abar.
How do we get our youngsters and ourselves as well, people of every age group, to understand that it's not enough to just exist
Yes.
on a day-to-day basis?
Sure.
There have to be, there has to be a certain set of goals, of ambition,
Sure.
a moral compass, and a sort of a knowledge of which path you're on and where you actually want to end up. How do we instill that in all
Very
elements
important
of
question.
society?
It begins at home. The first moral teacher, nourisher of a valuable and valuing life is the mother. Have we educated them? Have we created conditions for them to play that role?
Right.
We do that, we'll see society will begin to evolve. A very old folk tale that my grandmother used to tell. A little boy brings home an egg that he had picked up from a neighbor's yard. And she makes an omelette and gives it to him. Eventually, this young boy is convicted of murder. And he asks the judge, "Can I have just one wish fulfilled?" He says, "What is it?" He said, "I want to go see my mother before I die." They took him to his home, and his mother is wailing, crying, "Oh, what's going to happen?" And he says, "Mom, I'm sorry, but if you had stopped me that day I brought a stolen egg rather than making an omelette of it, I would not be here today."
That's so true. I mean, that is just such a profound statement that he's making, because what I think is alarming, you're mentioning the importance of the role of a mother in the formation of any society, not just ours.
Sure.
If a mother is sort of, she's watching the things that's available on the media, in today's broadcasting, is the typical family politics where a joint family and a husband and a mother-in-law and God knows what is going on. I don't watch them, but if you're watching something, you just think to yourself that what are we passing on? And if you have your majority of mothers watching things like that, they're just picking up on negative elements.
Exactly.
So are we promoting them with any sort of productive activity? Where are they going to find the inspiration to pass something on to their children? The children are also listening to them, having these rifts, internal rifts in the family.
Exactly. And this is one part where I said mothers need to be aware of it and follow the value given by the greatest teacher, the prophet, the last prophet. Don't waste time in ghibat.
Oh.
All right?
Yeah.
You stop that, things will change. But then the other part is we need to put mothers in schools and universities. We need to have free, universal, compulsory education up to not 10th grade, but as far as we can take them. Constitution of Pakistan, Article 25A, calls for establishing that system. Have we done that?
Yes.
If we haven't done that, then we have produced the largest out-of-school population in the world.
Extremely frightening.
And that is a ticking bomb.
So true.
And that is what Ibn-e-Khaldoon was saying.
He's talking about.
Don't do
Look
that.
to the future, invest in now, invest in education.
This is why I once again appeal that people who are watching this program should realize that we have to have better education.
And history is what we are making.
Exactly.
We're making it now.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
We are not reading history.
Yeah.
We have to make history
Absolutely.
through producing such intellect and such scholars.
Amazing. Dr. Mahmood Al-Hassan, but thank you so much. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. I was really, really enjoying the conversation. There were so many more questions that were coming to my mind, and it's been, absolutely a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you. It's my pleasure too. This is my lifelong mission. Let's keep doing that.
Wonderful. Keep,
all right.
Imparting all that wonderful knowledge, and you never know whose life you're going to change. That's one of the greatest things.
Thank you.
Okay, so that was a fantastic program. I really enjoyed talking to Dr. Mahmood about Ibn Khaldoon, the Muqaddimah, and so many things we take for granted, so many things we just act because we have adopted a sort of a robotic lifestyle in which we know that, this is the time we wake up in the morning, these are our activities for the day. How much of that are we consciously putting aside to invest in ourselves, in our children, in our society, in our education? Because at the end of the day, when you're looking back at life, you want to have made a difference. So with those thoughts, stay happy and blessed, and we'll see you again next week. Bye-bye. Thank you.